Hey everybody, Edo here, and I am excited because not only do I have Daniel Zayas on the line, say hello, Daniel.
Hello, everybody. Hello.
Hey, but also this is the first video that was from the Gaming with Edo season 4. Number of the tiers allowed people to request certain Q&As, and this was one of the Q&As. So I'm excited to have you on and to be talking about what you've been up to over the last few years.
Yeah, this is awesome. I'm excited to be part of it.
Cool. So, Daniel, I remember when I started Liftoff and getting into the scene, you've really been somebody who has been active in all sorts of different places. And
Yep.
it's, in my mind, it's a little hard to lace it all together or stream it all together in terms of what came first and second. But
Right.
I feel like one of the first things, and this is where you're going to correct me and be like, no, that's not what happened, is you started doing the Badger five
Yep.
or top Badger or game. I don't even remember what it was called exactly, but it was basically once a week you'd have your blog post put out a top 5 games, and then over time you built out a more rigorous rubric or rating system. And so, how did you? I mean, what were you doing, and then how did you decide like I'm going to dive into board games?
Okay. So this is actually, and you got it right, by the way. So my entry into like being any person who's making a name for himself in the industry actually did start with it was Kickstarter Badger at one point, and then it turned into Board Game Badger. But essentially, what happened was much like
Excuse me.
uh, a lot of people will relate to this. I got a shellacking, as it were, from people who knew better in trying to say this is the best way to measure how Kickstarter should be presented to the masses, right? So that was the idea. I was like, how do you show the unbiased version of the best Kickstarter campaign? And I I started with some pretty wacky stuff to start with, and they were like, "You gotta fix some of this stuff," and even to the point that like Jamie Stegmeyer and James Matthew and Tim Cassavetes, like all those guys who we know as like standards in the community, essentially took me aside and said, "Hey, look, here's all the things that are actually important in a Kickstarter campaign," and they allowed me to refine this rubric that I had created. And it was, yeah, I mean, it basically took off from there. I regularly blogged. I think that is the takeaway really is my entry in the industry was that I was ready to blog once per week on a regular basis and content that people would expect to like relatively remain the same. Like the rubric changed, sure. But it was always going to be a list of 5 to 10 games that I thought were worthwhile on a rubric that at first had nothing to do with how much money they were making. It eventually transferred into that. And then it evolved into me trying to decipher why they were making more money than everyone else, right?
Right, for sure. And I think there was a couple interesting things going on there. I mean, lots of different people
Right.
have had content on Kickstarters of the week and stuff like that. I felt like when yours came through, yours was this combination of both just some commentary, but then you tried to have the rubric, but also just like a nice presentation and layout, right? Like I've always
Right.
felt that yours was, and there's some things I liked more than others, and I've given you that feedback at different times, but
Yes. Yep. You
but
were one of the people actually who've taken me aside quite a few times over the years, right? And said, "Hey, do it this way, do it that way," right?
but it was there every week. It was easy to consume, right? It was really like, oh, clock, clock, clock. Here's this checks and the stars and the ratings, and it wasn't just one number, right? There was some information
Yeah.
in there. And one of the interesting things that you were doing, and I think still do more than a lot of people at that time, it seems to me, was building in a not automation, but it felt like through search and sharing, it was much more of a web product than I think just what a typical BGG post with a list or a video. There was a lot more going on under the hood in what you were doing.
Right.
Did you do that development work? Did you work with a developer? What's the
No,
background on the web stuff you do?
that's also another funny story. I'm going to tell you a funny trivia fact. Randy Hoyt, who runs Foxtrot, he in a roundabout way taught me CSS via his work with Treehouse long before he got in the board game industry. So Treehouse is this like a website where you can learn how to build websites, right?
Sure.
And it's like an e-course learning thing. And I took like quite a few of them in the space of like WordPress development and et cetera. So a lot of self-taught elements, but I do credit to the point where you're saying that it looked right. It's supposed to be a digestible content information. I do credit some of that to my learning, teaching myself essentially the ins and outs of WordPress development and what you can do, how malleable is it, and what can you automate, for instance, right? So at quite a few times I tried to pull in data from like Board Game Geek at one point, and that worked out well, except that I tried to maybe do too much, and then I swapped out for something that was maybe a little more efficient, right?
Sure,
So,
yeah. There's all that stuff on the back end, but it was pretty interesting. I mean, I think to the extent,
yeah,
I just had a curiosity for, I have a lot of different people that watch these videos.
right.
If you could amount the amount of, research and training you did via, like how much effort did you put in to get to that point? Were we talking weeks, months, years? Like how much learning did you do to start being able to do all that?
It wasn't so. It honestly was a trial by fire. So when you say like a time reference, I probably took probably like 3 months ish of like hardcore learning. Like every day was like dedicated to this learning effort. All at the same time that I was actually coming into enjoying board games and learning about the industry and seeing how Kickstarter was fitting into all of that. And so I would argue it was 3 months of like learning time, but then a lot of like messing up, breaking things and fixing it and breaking and fixing it, which is a typical website developer's experience, I think.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Or
Yeah.
even a website users.
Yeah.
But so, all right. But so during this early period, right? Like you're super provocative in a number of different ways, right? So
Yes.
you're one of the things, right? Is you're sort of you have this growing visibility and sort of voice, but again, since it's more systematic, it seems more consistent. But the Badger was like something people knew was happening, was aware of.
Right.
Had a ranking system, so people were curious. I mean, it was a pretty good solution in that regard. But also, just in general, and it certainly, it still seems to be the case. You have a penchant or you enjoy or whatever, you can define it, but you tend to ask questions, push on people, be responsive, and you're very high engagement in the community.
Right.
So great polls and things, but also oftentimes getting into tussles with people, right? And
Yep.
and
Yeah,
so that's sort of your
part
style.
of it. That's
Yeah.
part of the online experience, honestly.
Yeah.
It really is.
But also at that time, so you've had that kind of provocative, but you're also, and I think it's still been the case, very pushing on new platforms, right? You did Patreon, I think, pretty early in terms of putting stuff behind paywalls and this feature, and if it was all that. Can you take us through when you were? So there was this period where you were doing all that. You ran like a small Kickstarter as well. What were you? Because it seemed like you were like pushing on a lot of doors. Like you were just trying to do a lot of different things. How do you describe that point from your words?
Yeah. So a lot of it is So here's the thing. It's a very, very low risk to run a blog, right? It's very like just I'm going to put out my content and whoever absorbs it. And then I say, okay, well, let's add to the risk. Let's see if I can't. I don't want to like be any cliche saying, but there's a story of like how Steve Jobs created this little team to say, hey, I want you to destroy Apple. Like this team, like who's working for Apple, like I want you to destroy Apple and before my competitors do, right? So in that team, they created the iPhone, right, or iPod, right? Or no, it was iPhone that story comes from. And so like I'm internally always trying to ruin myself for the sake of like rebuilding, right, and transforming and evolving. Which is, I don't know, maybe that's like one of those things that's comes with some of the controversy, right? But it definitely has never shut any doors, right? It's always been I know a different process, or now I understand like a lifelong learning experiment, I guess. But all of that transition really, I would argue it's always been happening, right? Like there wasn't a one moment where I was like, let's just try Patreon. I heard about Patreon. I was like, okay, how do I ruin the board game Badger, not ruin, but like, how do I destroy that and rebuild it into something else? And how do I destroy the next thing and rebuild it into something else? How do a lot of it is nothing can stay the same, in my opinion. Otherwise it stagnates and is not relevant.
So, I mean, I think those are good points, right? I mean, sometimes people aren't as active on wanting to destroy their stuff and maybe want to still learn without destroying. But I think as far as the point is, right, it's about trying new things and being willing to allow those things to replace what you've already done in the past.
That is very true. Yeah.
So there's this period, right, where you then, and this is where it gets a little bit foggy. So there's the Badger, there's being active in the community. At this point, I don't think you're really running and adminning sites yet. And then I think the next thing was your Kickstarter. And then after that then you started seemingly doing the consulting thing. Like how did you move on and then start doing the thing where you were actively engaging and working, not contracting is not the right word, but helping out other projects? What happens in that time frame? What are the next steps there?
So here's a really interesting point. For all intents and purposes, my failed Kickstarter was the impetus to then help other people not to do those things. And really what it was, to be perfectly honest, it was very much a stress test of everything that I had learned to that point. Right. So it was very much a let me throw this really, really, I mean, for all intents and purposes, it was a bad product. Right. Sure. And it didn't have any merits on many fronts. Right. But it definitely, I was allowed to then say, I have this crazy rubric that not millions, but like a bunch of people follow, right, in the industry. And I started noticing people making their campaigns as a direct response to what I was measuring on, right? Trying to game the system so and it was to their own benefit because it was the best way to present a campaign. But it was one of those things where hey, I checked, I was getting these messages constantly hey, I did everything that you measure for, so I hope I do well in your campaign, because the only then the X factor would have been how much money did you actually raise compared to how much you should have,
sure.
Price for. Anyway, so the stress test was, can I do everything right per the rubric, right, and still throw spaghetti at the wall, as it were, and see if it sticks? So after that all happened, it definitely, again, the provocative nature is that it actually, made people angry. But here's the crazy part. We're 3 years or whatever past that point, and I'm still hearing about it. It was live for 48 hours. I'm still hearing about it, and which is crazy, because it's one of those things where it's that was viral in the industry, and now everyone knows who Daniel is, for better or worse, right? They know who I am based on either that, and then after that, it opened up a lot of doors for me to then continue on with the blog process, start a Patreon, close the Patreon because I didn't think it was doing what I had intended. Then start admitting all of these groups. I'm up to I think 20 admin groups right now,
which is crazy.
And yeah, it just and here's the thing: me adminning groups is just me following trends, right? So Board Game Reviewers Group is probably where it started, but then I started having longer conversations with James Matthew and started figuring out what he was after in the group process. And he's like, hey, I'm just trying to share my information with the world. Like, oh, I am also sharing information. And whenever you have an opening in your admin slots, think of me. And then he ended up having someone dropped out, and I took up the slack. And then also I started talking to the folks in charge of solo board gaming, right? And that's been a huge hit this year specifically. And they were like, hey, I was like, hey, I already admin these other groups. So, it's not too big of a stretch for me to say I can admin some other groups and just have these conversations with people. Helping people with their actual campaigns came through all of the admin work, right? Just me posting my opinions via the blog, but then also just talking to people as a result of, I guess some of that was the blog. So I did an interview series actually for a long time where I would regularly contact Kickstarter creators and ask them what their challenges were and what they have learned and what they would like to teach or what they would like to ask the next person, right?
Right, I remember those.
Yeah, so all of it was in the spirit of meeting people who were making things, right? And if I was doing that, then I was on the right track. And I guess eventually that led to there being an opening at Eagle Griffin Games, which then I worked for a year. And then that led to they were just launching a U.S. management position, U.S. sales manager for Long Pack Games, and now I'm working for them. So it's just all of this is constant learning. I haven't scratched the surface with what manufacturing is. Right, I think I don't know that it's possible to learn all of that. Even having studied, even if you were to study mechanical engineering and product design, whatever, UX or whatever, right? You would still have a lot of gaps in knowledge with how it's actually done in China, which is this new horizon for me. It's very, very exciting.
Right. No, in manufacturing, there's a ton in there. If you look at my interview with Sherry, she actually came in through working in factories. So her level of knowledge is crazy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But, well, so, I think you moved through a litany of stuff there, but one of the interesting things is oftentimes, you come up a lot for a variety of reasons. You've sort of managed to be everywhere at one point or another.
It's mind share.
Yeah, but the way I've sort of described it to people when it's come up is, and it speaks to what you described, which is there was this period in the beginning where you were around, and I'm using the word provocative, right?
Sure.
And
that's
but
fair.
you had a mixed knowledge base. Some things you knew about, some things you didn't, but you were willing to sort of talk about everything. And that's some of the, that was some of the friction with people and those sorts of things. But that over time, over these 2 years or 3 years, you're talking about where you're doing all these things, you're pushing on the doors, you're going on, you actually became knowledgeable, right? So you went from somebody who was probably getting into arguments where people felt like, well, what does he know, type of thing, to places where you've walked through to the other side where it's like, no, this guy's actually worked on a lot of things and has a lot of great perspective on a variety of things in the industry. How did you? So in that, you talked about Long Pack, but one of the things you do because we sort of talked about the blogs. We briefly talked about the adminning. I had no idea you admin so many. Like I know the ones you admin, but I didn't realize there's so
Yeah.
many. But then you start doing the Kickstarter expert, working on
Yeah.
campaigns, sort of
Right.
consulting work, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. No, that's true. That's exactly what it is.
How and it sounds like this has come through you being active as an admin. But how do you structure that work when somebody says, "Hey, I have a campaign coming up"? Like, what does an engagement with you look like when it comes to help me with a campaign?
Sure. So, like on the surface, it's weekly Skype chats, similar to what we're doing now, right? So, weekly Skype chats of an hour long, and they'll have a time slot, for a week. Each week it'll be the same, and then it'll be talking like we are. However, us having done this before, right? Us having like ran through enough campaigns to understand the ins and outs of running a Kickstarter. We take things for granted, I think, that are actually tough to break into as a new creator. A lot of that is for the simple sake that I have met enough people in the industry, like that already opens doors and speeds up the process for a lot of would-be creators, I think, when they're like, hey, I don't understand shipping. Like it's like a fog and I have no idea what I'm doing. And what do you mean that I have to, manufacture the game and then somehow it magically arrives in my backer's hands? They're like, what do you mean you have to do a freight on board or exports depending on how you can navigate the Chinese export system, right? What do you mean you have to hire on a freight forwarder and then do a split shipment to then carry that over to your fulfillment partners, and all of those handoffs need to be, well organized for the sake of they're going to be waiting for your product, right? All of these like things that people don't really understand, or have focused elsewhere, right? It's never like they've been lazy. It's always they just focus their attention on making their game look right and making their campaign. In some cases, like I'm very much a logistics manager, and not necessarily like hand-holding them all throughout the process, but at the very least connecting them to the people who are going to then open those doors, introducing them to as many reviewers as I know so that they are able to then have their product shown to people who are of any, relevance in the industry they're trying to sell to, right? Introducing them to, the people who run the Facebook groups that do giveaways, right? Like, how would you know that? How would you even know, you might be able to do like a Facebook search for board games, and then you may add yourself into those groups and then try and get on a schedule with them. But like all of those things are sometimes just foggy to the creators. There's a lot of people who have made a game, for instance, and they don't realize, oh yeah, I also need to pay somebody to do the graphic design in my campaign itself, right? And if they've already, that ship has sailed with their artists for the game, then maybe I can connect them with some people who I know who already are doing those things and can build them a package deal of, hey, I'll do some like giveaway graphics and also your Kickstarter campaign for a couple $100, or like maybe there's people who are doing development in Tabletopia and Tabletop Simulator, and I can get their game on there for whatever their price is, right? All of these like things that we as creators take for granted. And some of the things that we take for granted is our own ego, right? So I learned this the hard way, but also I'm able to, cut through the fluff, as it were, and say, no, your art isn't good enough. It's not. It's not good enough. You need to hire an artist. And if you take this passion seriously, then you will stand a chance at doing well on Kickstarter. You just need to take it more seriously and invest in your own passion.
Right. So certainly that humility is important, right? Being able to think about what's working, what's not, what's at standards, what isn't.
Right.
Right. And so just not that you can't be. I mean, it's pretty easy to find you anywhere. But if somebody's interested in that, they just email you or message you or whatever, and you
Yeah,
have that.
yeah. So I'm on Facebook everywhere, and anyone who's discovering this maybe on YouTube, it's dzayas.com is my personal website. Yeah, and then also like connecting them with or having them navigate a quotation, right? That's another one that's actually important that nobody really explains to anybody. I think so. It just a lot of things that we do in the industry that just aren't necessarily things that a newcomer would understand to even ask.
And so while this is happening, right, and now you're working at Longpack, and you say you're at conventions for them, you've also it seems like decided to get back into, like, over the years you've released an image or a name or asked questions about this game you were designing, whether it's it's popped up in a few places, but there hasn't really been much along the way. It sounds like you are going to go at a game again. Is that just designed for publishing, or are you going to do Kickstarter? How far along is that?
Yeah, so it's probably a good 50 to 60% done in the artwork. It's coming along. It should be done with the artwork by February, I would argue. Just some tweaks and all that. The game itself is fun. It's complete. It's a I don't even know how to explain it. It's a game where
we're talking about Cutie Patootie right now, right?
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah. When Cutie Met Patootie is the new game. Yeah, and it's the start of this world that's been in my head, which is a very fluffy, creative type sort of statement. But I've got this the story in my head that is very been bugging me to get out of my head, right? And so I basically, this is one of those things where 100%, if people ask me, years from now, if, as long as the game is successful, right, is, where did the game start? And it actually is theme first. And I'm really molded a game to fit the storyline of the story in my head. So, what you're actually going to see in the campaign is not anything tied to there's going to be updates after the campaign in regards to production and all that. Sure. But during the campaign, it's actually going to be, I don't think I'm coining it, but it's essentially a narrative campaign where you are following along the story and appreciating the gameplay through that story, which is a very Hollywood thing to do, I think, right? Sure. It's movies do this with their own franchises and then release products related to the story. So I'm working on, I don't know the format that it's going to be presented in yet. I've got the story done and I've got the artists working on it, but it's going to be in the framework of maybe there's pieced videos, or maybe it's released in comic book fashion. It's one of those things where it's just going to be a story that then carries the product. And wherever that takes me is where it takes me, right? But the process has been pretty holistic up to this point. I've just, as I need art, I will release art and then I'll go through it.
Yeah. So when you're looking at, actually we're filming in 2017, but this will probably post the first week of January, something like that. But when you're looking at 2018, you're obviously you're working for Longpack Games. That's one thread. You are adminning a ton on Facebook. That's another. It seems like you're still doing the consulting work as it comes up, and then you have at some point this Kickstarter. Is that what you look when you look at 2018? Is that what you see, or are there other interesting initiatives or things that you're going to be doing? As well.
So I'm working on doing a web series video format that is going to be resembling what you see on Twitch, but it's going to be Facebook Live, and it's going to be tackling digital platforms. right? So the Tabletopias and the tabletop simulators of the world, and the tabletop, or what is it, the tabletop arena?
I'm not even familiar with that one.
Yeah, so there's another one that's tabletop. I think it's tabletop arena. Anyway, there's not a lot of people who are even like entertaining this as a review format, right? There's not a lot of people who are actually doing that, saying like, because a lot of people will want the tactile thing because that's going to be the final product, right, or closer to the final product. And not a lot of people are actually giving attention to these digital platforms that are, for all intents and purposes, the gameplay experience is relatively intact, right? You're going to understand the mechanics. You're going to be able to appreciate the art. You're going to be able to, talk with your friends via Discord or whatever, right? And all of those things combined, all you're missing really is the face-to-face contact, and also maybe like the tactile experience of the gameplay, right? So I don't think enough people are actually paying attention to that. I think 2018 is going to be a big year, just for the sake of like, you see all the big guys building apps that are, adding to their gameplay or even replacing the games themselves.
Yeah, I wonder, it's not clear to me when you look at Tabletop Simulator and Tabletopia how big those audiences honestly are. Right. I mean, certainly the app scene's large, and there's a lot of.
Sure.
I just don't know. It might be a huge opportunity, and there's actually this large trend of real audience growth, and over time, people are just going to move to these, 3D VR experiences, or they just don't match the convenience of an app, and people just stick with apps and board games. I don't know the answer to that question.
Sure. I don't either, to be honest. Yeah. It's one of those things where I see a lot of development work happening on the digital platforms, and that's the impetus to be like, let's not, go back to the old days where I was reviewing board games, right? And rebuild that, destroy that thing, and rebuild it as, now I can have direct contact with these developers who are making games, and maybe, I'll be the only person who did the Tabletopia version on a live format, right? Because that's one of those things.
I've seen a little bit here and there, especially in how to plays. But you're right that I don't think I've seen them in the context of reviews, and it'll be interesting. Right. I mean, I think you'll have to just see how. I guess
they're not going to be reviews. I'm going to be playing with the actual creators, and it's going to be sure. And like maybe just media content. We'll just call it media content for the argument's sake. So I'm going to be exploring that in this coming year. Also, one of the newest groups that I've created and now admin is the Board Game Fitness Challenge, and I definitely want to take like a couple minutes to talk about that.
Sure.
There's a group called Board Game Fitness Challenge, and the idea is that every quarter we have a sponsor, and this first quarter is going to be Big Kid Games. So Jason went to bat for me on this idea. I'm very grateful, but he essentially is going to do a giveaway for I think it's 10 games if you win the biggest percentage of your weight in that quarter. And we're doing a registration at this point, maybe when this is published, right? It'll already be ongoing. But anyone who sees this can join the group, cheer on the competitors, and get in line for the second quarter, which will have all new games and a new sponsor, et cetera.
And is it just tracking progress and being a community around getting fit, or is there actually some sort of regimen or other things as well?
No, it's literally tracking weight loss. And some people don't need to lose as much weight as others. I understand that. This is built so that the people who, in the most sensitive way, saying it, need it the most, right, are encouraged to compete and and for the chance of winning all this huge prize. There's a first, second, and third place, but for the sake of winning a prize and helping the community, I think I think that board gaming is a sedentary hobby, right? Or whatever the word is, and I think that it's possible to do both, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So it's one of those like marriages of two ideas that that I think is important, and I encourage everyone to join that group specifically, to follow along and cheer on the people who are trying to better themselves.
Sure. No, it's a good thing. I mean, there have been a few initiatives here and there. I remember, I don't know whatever happened to the podcast, but Tiffany and a few other people were doing the Couch to Con one.
Yeah, no, I remember that. I was in one of her videos for she did yoga at Essen a year ago.
That's fun.
Yeah, and I was in she did like a subway yoga thing, and it was ridiculous. But if you go back and look at that video, I'm somewhere in there doing stretches and whatever.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I think being healthy and playing games is super important. Because great games keep coming out, and you want to be there to play as many as you can for as long as you can.
There you go. There's the incentive. Yeah, live long enough to play. Eric Lang's 50 millionth game.
Yeah, he's running out of people to partner with, really. Cool. Well, and I guess the last thing we're coming at, though I am on, thanks to the Kickstarter campaign, a better computer, so it shouldn't just blow up at. It was basically blowing up at like 38, 40 minutes, and then it would just. I think I'll be okay. But is there a way now? So you've built up this knowledge base. You're staying current on things that are going on. You're pretty familiar with campaigns.
Yes.
Do you now have a current consolidated outline on best practices anymore, or is it all dated? Like, have you brought that information together again in any sort of way?
Yeah, so some of this is there is the argument that no two campaigns are alike. Sure. There is the argument that you are leaning more heavily into your audience building today than you were potentially early on. You do need to always create an audience, and you did always need to do that. But there were some campaigns that could launch maybe a year or two ago that didn't have much of a following at all. But based on how the campaign looked or the novel theme or whatever, they could get away with it. And that's not true anymore, to be honest. There are certain viral campaigns, but those viral campaigns have a longer and longer head beforehand, where you think that it came out of nowhere, but it really did not. There's a lot of celebrities, or I guess larger entities with bigger budgets. I published one of my last published posts was things to look for in 2018. And one of the things is Kickstarter is not indie anymore, if it ever was, right? It's not indie for the sake that there are plenty of people with big budgets and huge followings now taking their turn having their first Kickstarter campaign, and it's definitely something to watch out for. It doesn't take away from Kickstarter as a business because it legitimizes it for newcomers to come in. I'm on the side of you see those arguments that like Simon is ruining Kickstarter. Well, I disagree 100%. Right? It's one of those things where they are legitimizing the platform, adding to it, not taking away.
Yeah, I mean it's a maturing platform, right? It's a maturing platform, right. Like the iPhone's a maturing platform. There are articles today about how the cost of acquisition and ad spend on iOS games is prohibitive, and you just have bigger winners and more losers. I mean that's what happens when a platform matures, and there's different watershed moments and collapses and things like that come along. But as people are successful, make money and make games, more people want a piece of that. As the industry's being disruptive with Amazon and direct to consumer marketing versus traditional channels, there are going to always be winners and losers. I think, from a society perspective, there's a liberal voice that says there's going to be winners and losers, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's progress. And then there's a more conservative, and I don't mean to use those words any more loaded, but where it's like, well, we should protect and cherish some of that stuff, and it progress for progress sake isn't always what we want.
But enough about Star Wars.
Fair enough. We can talk about Yeah, that I don't want this to blow up on Star Wars chats, but yeah, so that was I actually
You don't want to know that.
the thing that I enjoyed the most last night. I was just scrolling through Facebook. Was everyone's doing the like order of the movies you like with commas, like 7 4 3 8 whatever. Then a bunch of people just started doing that, but like with like math problems, and then like
Yes.
up down left right right, like making it's pretty
The
funny.
counterculture to the Facebook
Star Wars
basic.
ranking. Yeah. Well, anyway, listen. I am. We'll see how this one holds up on this machine.
Okay.
Hopefully, everything well. But until I'm going to just push it a couple minutes each time. But
Sure.
thanks for being on. And honestly, thank you for all that you've done. I think that even you and I have tussled a number of times over the years. But
Yeah.
it is really important.
You're still a very good influence of mine, to be honest. So 9 times out of 10, you're right, and it just takes me a minute to come around.
Sure. Well, no, but being very proactive and helpful to the community and providing that information and thinking about ways to help disperse it and helping campaigns, it's all great stuff. And certainly, I do want to catch up more about Long Pack another time to
Sure.
learn more about what they've been doing lately. But I hope you do have a good year, and thanks for being on.
Thank you.
Awesome. Hey everybody, Edo here, and thanks for watching Gaming with Edo. Reviews over here on this playlist, League and Insider videos over here on this one. Subscribe, share, all that good stuff. But most importantly, play some great games. Thanks. Bye.